Good afternoon and welcome to the Learn Some series with me, Kim Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's leadership and marketing segment, a marketing communications and expert and co-host Craig Paisley. How are you doing, Craig?
Evan, I'm great, thanks. Yeah, hope you're doing well. Good to be chatting again today and looking forward to another interesting conversation, I have to say.
Can you give us a bit of an overview of last week's conversation, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. Thanks. So we evolved the conversation from 2 weeks ago when we discussed the topic of employer branding to last week when we discussed the topic of customer experience. And what we learned there is that there is a direct relationship, Kevin, between these two concepts, with customer experience being described as consisting around three key dimensions. These being functional: was the service or product delivered effectively as expected? Emotional: did the interaction leave customers feeling valued, respected, and confident? And experiential: was the journey across the digital, physical, and human touch points and channels smooth and coherent? And the key takeout from understanding those two conversations is that the link between employer branding and customer experience is rooted in the idea that how a company treats its employees strongly influences how it treats its customers and vice versa.
And Craig, just to touch on that, I like the fact that it's broken down into functional, emotional, experiential, and it just gives you a quick, easy reference to it. Craig, so what do we have leading from this conversation? What do we have in store for today?
Evan, as a reminder of at least for our listeners, as we're in the month of conversations focusing around brand marketing and communications related topics. So for today, I actually want to evolve the employer branding and customer experience topic a step further, and really see how it shifts, because both of these concepts feed into the importance of what makes a powerful CEO brand. And yeah, I think this is something that would resonate with you, because I know you spend an inordinate amount of your time in your professional career working with CEOs. But I recently came across this particular topic on branding strategy insider.com a while ago and thought that this would be a good build on the last two conversations. I'll address the branding strategy insider.com article in more detail later in the conversation, but really wanted to start looking at some of the definitions around the topic and then set some context to the relevance of the powerful CEO brand.
Craig, and I've never heard of that terminology, the powerful CEO brand. So it's interesting to unpack that.
Right. So I want to start with, in essence, what is a definition of what a CEO brand is, and referencing content primarily from the Forbes agency council and the council and the CEO magazine, because these two reference sources have some fantastic content around this particular proposition. So what we learned from the article as a collective is a CEO brand is the public and professional persona of a chief executive officer, shaped by their values, their leadership style, communication, and visibility. And you can see the link in terms of talking directly to a brand proposition. It reflects how the CEO is perceived both inside the organization, which is by employees and stakeholders, and then outside the organization, which is by public, media, investors, and obviously customers, Kevin. So looking at the extensive work that you do around the CS space, I'm going to flip a question to you. What aspect of that definition resonates with you? And do you think that there's actually something that's possibly missing in terms of this CEO brand definition?
Craig, I think it's a very slippery slope, and that for me, it's so narrow, because essentially from your values, your leadership style, your communication, your visibility, all of them are touch points, but all of it is contextual. And part of what we've looked at, I can't even think of it now, but recently, in a leadership facilitation process we've recently gone through, is looking at the importance of understanding conflict, for example, right? So, and that really tunes into your leadership style, because sometimes the conflict approach you are taking is to be quite dominant and quite get things done kind of approach, where um, you know depending on the situation, the context of the situation, the content of the situation, and various aspects that influence how you show up as someone in at the head and the face of a brand. really depends on how you're going to navigate that. So I think it's, I probably wouldn't add anything else to that. Values, leadership style, communication, and visibility. I probably would say, depending on the content and context of the situation, like I would add that. Yeah.
And I think what's great about what you just said is that brands themselves behave badly. Context
Yeah.
and content again, that really does resonate with the CEO aspect. So yeah, thanks. Like that.
And just to add, like a thinking process, because essentially, when something goes really bad, when something goes really wrong in a brand, how that CEO's communication style and leadership style shows up could really, give people a certain impression of what's the CEO going to do. I'll take Elon Musk when he was challenged about Twitter, and people kind of going, well, if you don't, we'll take our advertising elsewhere. And he did the whole big FU kind of thing on a public forum, on a, in a public forum. And immediately in that moment, you were like, okay, that immediate context of that situation and his response to that context completely changed who Elon Musk shows and is to the world. So, it really does define. But, there are many brands that have gone through some serious backlashes or downfalls or getting things wrong. And leadership, because of the context and content of the situation, they've showed up in a very different, unexpected way.
Yeah,
So it really,
brilliant.
and it really showcases who that brand or the CEO of that brand will be. So, Craig, with that said, what do we know about the critical dimensions of a CEO brand?
Kevin, I came across some really interesting content pieces that could answer this question, but I want to specifically reference content that builds from the definition that we've just discussed, and then look at a couple of the other aspects of it. So for the first reference, this being the 5 dimensions of a CEO brand as drawn from the following 2 articles. The first article here is Personal Branding for CEOs, How to Balance Professionalism and Authenticity, the great word coming through there. This was published as recently as 18 December 2024 to Forbes.com. And then an article from a slightly longer period away was titled A Guide to Successful Personal Branding for CEOs, published on the 20th of June 2022 to the CEO magazine. Topic that's been going on for a long time, but hugely relevant in current times. And the 5 aspects of a CEO brand that emanate from these 2 articles read as follows. So aspect 1 is personal reputation. And interesting that you picked up on Elon Musk, because that would play directly into that proposition. And this is how the CEO is known as an individual: credibility, ethics, reliability, and expertise. Aspect 2 is about leadership identity. And this is about the CEO's distinct approach to decision making, vision setting, and culture building. Aspect 3 is public presence. This is about the CEO's visibility and engagement on platforms like LinkedIn, media outlets, social media interviews, keynote events, and more. Alignment, at least aspect 4, is alignment with company values. This is about how well the CEO's personal ethos actually reflects and reinforces the brand's mission and strategy of the respective organization. And then finally, aspect 5 is influence and impact. And this is about the CEO's ability to inspire action, to shape the narratives, and create stakeholder confidence. And interesting, just as I was giving the insights to these 5 aspects, again, I drew reference to Elon Musk every single time in my mind on how he either fits in positively or negatively to these particular aspects, Kevin.
As you were speaking through this, Craig, what's interesting is Donald Trump, for example, because personal reputation, if you look at, when he's in public space and when he's when he's doing any kind of interview, he's just bullshit baffles brains kind of thing. He just talks shit the whole time. It's this absolute nonsense that comes out of his face. But yet, when you look at, even if you look at personal reputation, it's somehow he's managed to overrule and override what that even meant. And this is why I'm using him as an example, because if you look at public presence, yet his public presence is enormous. he does. I don't know if it's the bullshit baffles brain kind of concept that he leans into really well, but he has enormous public presence, and the way that he comes across, and nobody challenges the man, and when they do, he has severe kind of ways to kind of respond to that. So it's funny when you see that, because these are such important aspects to the CEO brand, and yet Donald Trump is a wonderful example of how not to do it. Yet he's doing something that people still buy into. It's a funny dichotomy that's happening in obvious world kind of marketing, because the news is everywhere about Donald Trump all the time, and yet he talks absolute nonsense.
That's such a perfect segue into the next two little aspects I want to chat about here. So taking those particular 5, 6 aspects into account, we note that the CEO brand is not just about image, it's about influence. And this talks 100% into the space and place that Donald Trump is. It's about influence. And here it's about the intersection of personality, leadership, and communication that shapes how people feel about both the leader and the company they represent. And in this instance, referencing Donald Trump, it would be about the leader, president, the company, the country. And a powerful CEO brand is built on a foundation of authenticity, strategic communication, and consistent values. And I think that is possibly where the deviation would be in respect to the gent we've just referenced. But another hugely important point to note here, Kevin, is that building a powerful CEO brand really involves deliberate and authentic approach to leadership, to communication, and alignment with that respective organization's values. And by embodying these principles, the CEO can influence and drive their companies towards sustained success.
And Craig, and that's why I just mentioned Donald Trump, because as much as he's disliked, there is an amount of influence that man has, not only because of the crazy ass things he says, but also because somehow he just gets the airtime. He's managed to get the airtime, and that does influence what people are paying attention to all the time. DEI has never been more spoken about in the world than it currently is, based on the fact that he went and made some crazy ass statement about it and an executive order. So it's really interesting to kind of look at him as I don't know, as a case study to kind of go, what
Absolutely.
is this?
But if you look at the last 2 bullet points in terms of the reference around that deliberate, if we leave the word authentic out, deliberate approach to communication, deliberate alignment to the influence drivers as well. So he most definitely has got a good strategy in place relative to achieving what he sets out to achieve. And he's most definitely doing that.
And I think it ties back into the conversation of the marketing strategy of flooding the market, until he's just busy on doing stuff on the side, and he floods information in a direction. Doesn't matter what it is, he just keeps going. Craig, you mentioned branding strategy insider.com article at the beginning of the conversation. What are we actually learning from this article?
Yeah, Kevin, so a couple of key points to take out from the article, and really I think the opening paragraph sets a great context to that. And it reads as follows. Can a CEO build a brand that is bigger than their company? Think of Donald Trump in this regard. A truly iconic brand. A CEO brand have the power to transform from one business, at least transfer from one business, to bring power and credibility to succeed in totally different businesses. And that's a really important line to remember on something we're going to touch on further in the conversation. And a strong CEO brand creates significantly more financial value than the brand of the business they run. In fact, both of those final 2 statements are really important in the context of when we're starting to look at the kinds of CEO brands further in the conversation. But what's key here, Kevin, is the article notes that there have been a number of CEO brands that have eclipsed the power of the brands of their businesses and products. And that's something that is going to solicit some good conversation, I reckon.
But Craig, as you're speaking through this now, what I think one of the things that does stand out about this is that, from this perspective and looking at the people we've just mentioned, there are other names that are really come to mind that are very famous and popular. But you kind of go, they're not necessarily, they're not saying the things that make people warm and fuzzy necessarily, but they do definitely stand for something. There's an obvious kind of position they hold.
And I think in light of that, it's important for us to get to understand what the types of CEO brand styles there are. And I just want to reference those two lines again. Can a CEO brand have the power to transfer from one business to bring power and credibility to a totally different business? And can a strong CEO brand create significantly more financial value than the brand of the business they are running at that point in time? And with those two key questions, and the first of the CEO brand types that the article references is the first industrialist CEO brands. And yeah, we note that the first of the true CEO brands were industrialists, Kevin. They built the railways, the canals, the steel mills, and in the US, particularly the US oil industry. So if you think of Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Jacob, Astor James, James Duke, and then Henry Flagler, many of them use their brands and money to start many different types of ventures. Astor had railways and fur, completely opposite ends of the spectrum. James Hill had fuel, coal, steamboats, and railroads. He understood the ecosystem connected. James Duke had tobacco and electrical power. Again, two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And Henry Flagler had oil and railroads. He again understood the connected ecosystems there.
Yeah, and I think that's, as you mentioned, just as you started this, is it's the the connection that you can take this entire brand that you've built in your own name and move into any industry and various industries to kind of keep going, and it still has that impact in that brand. It is quite fascinating, and people don't necessarily realize it from that context.
If one looks at, although there may be a little bit of linkage relative to, call it the transport spectrum, is that if you do look at Elon Musk, for instance, he's sitting there having developed Tesla. Then there's the energy around the battery packs, which, homes and factories are running off. And then he's sending technology to space. So again, quite a disconnected yet in a similar way, connected on the mobility aspect. He's moving across the spectrum of CEO brand types there. But the article, and I think this is probably one of the CEO brand types that we're more familiar with, is that the financier CEO brand type is the next that the article reference. And yeah, we note that the next generations of CEO brands were the financiers and brand that we are still familiar with to this day. JP Morgan, then John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, and James Fisk, and the first two being, names that still resonate with us to this day. Kevin, we definitely know the first two names as I referenced, and JP Morgan, who, according to the article, stood head and shoulders above the others. He dominated not only finance industry, but industry per se. During his long Wall Street career, he was responsible for the formation, take note of this, US Steel, International Harvester, and GE. And he had controlling interests in Athena, Western Union, and 21 railroads. JP Morgan's power was so great that when the US government actually ran into financial crisis, JP Morgan was called to rescue it. So really the bastion of financier CEO brand types. Founded in 1871, JP Morgan today is still a prominent global financial services firm and a major subsidiary of JP Morgan Chase & Co. Obviously, we know they've had some challenges in the last decade or two as well, but the organization offers a wide range, predominantly of financial solutions, including investment banking, asset management, and private banking, commercial banking. So yeah, a brand that is stuck within the realm of the finance ecosystem, Kevin.
But
The next,
Craig,
yeah.
sorry, but I'm just thinking with the financier CEOs as well. We also have some South African CEOs that are also. I think of Adrian Gore from Discovery Health, for example. People know him for that specifically. I'm not sure if he does anything in other areas, but people know him very specifically for that brand.
So
So
that's a really, I like that reference. Yes. So, sitting in the vitality, coming into discovery, the vitality proposition, a nice extension of the value chain in financial services, going into the health space as well. Yeah. Good linkage, on a side note, not that he's necessarily a CEO in this particular space, but he's most definitely known for owning and creating one of the great wine brands in South Africa, the Waterford Wine Estate. But Kevin, the next type of CEO brand that the article mentions is the 20th century CEO brands. And yeah, we note that since at least the late 20th century, the industrialists and finances have been displaced by obviously technology and service brands. Interestingly, Asian empires is noted in this regard as well. And then the good old oligarchs, and I love this particular reference, and the robbers of state assets. We absolutely know the relevance of this particular frame of reference to South Africa. These leaders built CEO brands that became more powerful and created more value than the brands of the respective companies that they started. Four examples of great successful 20th century CEO brands are Jack Welch, General Electric. Jack Welch is known for transformational leadership, for performance culture, very much around Six Sigma focus as well. His brand impact was embodied in ruthless efficiency. And one thing that he really did embed and bring to the fore was shareholder value. And he became a symbol of American corporate successful right through the 80s and 90s, Kevin. Another one, yeah, one of my favorites, Steve Jobs, Apple, late 20th century. He was known for his visionary product design, for his great storytelling, and his absolute obsession with simplicity. His brand impact was that, his personal brand was Apple, so a really great connector to the product brand there as well. And even before the iPod era, he represented innovation, and I love this counterculture cool. That's a lovely reference point there. Bill Gates, just known for strategic aggression, absolute tech entrepreneur, and focus on software. His impact is, as Microsoft grew in dominance, Gates became a symbol of both innovation and big tech power, superpower. And finally, yeah, absolutely one of my heroes is Richard Branson of the Virgin Group, known for his maverick style, for his risk-taking, and importantly, for his customer-first disruption. His brand impact is his CEO brand blurred lines between business and pop culture. And again, that's why I love him so much, is being able to interweave that into the fabric of society, beginning in the 60s with music and then building momentum right the way through the 90s. Euro for me. Kevin?
Great.
Yeah.
Interesting about this, just those 20th century brands or CEOs or CEO brands, is these guys that you've now just mentioned have what's interesting about them. And I think of Jack Ma as also, probably one of those, but they're CEOs that have actually impacted how we do business and life on earth. So they really have quite a magnificent impact. If you look at just the commonality, what is that commonality? And it's how we do business, how we do anything on
And
earth.
again, there's a lovely segue there, because actually the likes of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and most definitely Jack Ma, they also classified as tech CEO brands. So when you understand the power of their 20th century visioning and capability and the strength of their tech understanding, they've all built brands that are successfully used to create more value in other businesses. So, Jack Ma into his online presence and things like that as well, which is just phenomenal. In the same way, though, that Steve Jobs, Jack Ma, and Bill Gates sort of fall into these two categories, Richard Branson is also classified as a service CEO. And I really like this because he created businesses in a variety of other sectors, for instance, airlines, cruises, media, money, fitness, bridal, and then he also dabbled in the spaceship spectrum for a while as well.
And it's that I think that's quite unique to him as well, because he's defined how better service and types of service that there could be in the world, and he's really at the forefront of it. So I mean, Craig,
Yeah, sorry, just on that point, absolutely. He set the benchmark for service capability and putting customer experience right front and center of brands, Kevin. Absolutely.
but now with this in context, why do organizations actually need a CEO brand?
Yeah, that's a good question, considering as we opened the conversation, you noted that you hadn't really heard of this particular proposition or term. So, yeah, referencing sort of four sources. And Kevin, you must check out Corn Ferry, global consulting firm specializing in executive research, leadership development, and talent management. Great article called CEO as a Brand. Then obviously Harvard Review, a lot of my references coming from them is why your CEO needs a strong personal brand. The Edelman Trust Barometer, the annual reports, there has been a lot of negative commentary around Edelman at times, particularly in respect of their, supporting the fossil fuel guys. But then Spencer Stewart, again, another global consulting firm specialized in executive search, but also board advisory. They have a wonderful article, CEO Transitions and Branding. And yeah, setting context to the question, we note that organizations benefit from strong CEO brands for several strategic and practical reasons. Most importantly, though, that is that the CEO's personal brand, how they are publicly perceived, can significantly influence the reputation, trust, and performance of the company as a whole. And here we have to reference Elon Musk in respect of Tesla, because being appointed into Trump's Dodge administration has negatively impacted on his Tesla brand to the point that, burning down, folk against him were burning down dealerships, going out and damaging Tesla owners' vehicles and things like that. So you can see that direct correlation to how the CEO's personal brand is perceived publicly, and most definitely negatively impacting on the reputation and trust of and the performance of Tesla at that point in time. But referencing the key sources here, let's take a look at, I think it's about 4 or 5 points to touch on why CEO brands matter, Kevin. Starting with reason one is trust and credibility. People trust people more than institutions. And interestingly, we touched on this when we were talking about employer branding, where people will go to staff to get deeper understanding of the organization than they will go to articles and other communications, because they trust the narrative of people. And to this extent, a visible and credible CEO humanizes the organization, making it more relatable and obviously trustworthy. And in crisis situation, a respected CEO can serve as that reassuring, authoritative voice, which would, in essence, help risk mitigation and managing negativity here. The next reason is attracting talent, and it's really great to see it right up at number 2. The CEO with a strong brand often signals that compelling vision and value of the organization, which can and is a top draw for top talent. Important when building your employer brand, as I just mentioned. Employees, especially the likes of millennials and Gen Z, are strongly interested in working for companies with that authentic, purpose-driven leadership capability, Kevin. Probably one of the most important reasons is reason 3, and this is investor confidence. Investors are looking for strong leadership. Let me try that again, tongue-tied. Investors are looking for strong leadership. And to this extent, a well-regarded CEO can instill that absolute confidence in current and prospective shareholders, and most definitely impacting on shareholder value, Kevin. Also, a great angle here is media savvy CEOs serve as a spokesperson in investor relations, helping articulate the strategy and bringing that persuasive alignment to the marketplace.
Greg, and I think, as you mentioned, attracting talent, the importance of that, and being, right up on this list. I think being in a fortunate position where I have worked with, C-suite executives, you often, and you have that kind of, and this, like when you have those conversations, they start knowing each other, and they do get to the point where, the head of marketing or the head of sales or the head of whatever, they know who they want to be working with. They know which CEOs, which companies would be an absolute pleasure to. So, part of that, it's fantastic to know that, attracting talent is part of that, really cultivating, because, and we know this as well from the work we do, is who can you work with that that's absolutely going to pull it off and pull it off well. And, it's part of attracting talent. And I think it's a very important part that people don't often see and recognize, but a very important part of creating that CEO brand.
Absolutely. Reason 4 as to why CEO brand matters is differentiation in the market. And, we know in competitive industries, the CEO with a unique voice or a unique perspective can definitely help set that organization apart from its competitors, and leaning into reinforce its position in that regard. This is especially useful in sectors like tech, like finance, and now, very importantly, sustainability, where leadership vision can absolutely shape and draw in public perception. The fifth reason is brand extension. And a strong CEO brand can absolutely extend the reach of a company's brand, opening doors to other partnerships, opening doors to speaker opportunities, thought leadership conferences, most importantly, again, media coverage and influence. And through CEO's platforms, the organization's able to participate in a much broader conversation, right down into societal issues as well, and stretching from the likes of innovation through to points of view on climate policy, Kevin. And the final reason why CEO brands matter is internal culture and engagement. And again, this picking up on the employer brand proposition, because it starts alluding into some of the aspects of the EVP. So a visible and consistent CEO can definitely help align internal culture, can help reinforce the company's employee value proposition messaging and boost employee engagement. And employees tend to be more motivated when they feel connected to that accessible and inspiring leader. And in closing, Kevin, a CEO brand isn't just about image. It's a strategic asset. It drives the visibility. It helps deliver that trust. It clearly sets the differentiation and builds that alignment between personal leadership and the corporate.
Greg, and I love that, we touch on it, and because as you mentioned, as I mentioned, I wasn't aware of that terminology, but someone at a micro level, someone said to me the one day, willy-nilly kind of commented on the EFF and shared this just on Facebook, and someone messaged me, someone who knows, had been following me for some time, said to me, Kevin, please take that post down. Like you've worked far too long and far too hard to accomplish what you've accomplished, to just have such a random statement or, share on one of your social media platforms. And it was a very small thing, but the message really sunk. It really like sunk deep. And I was like, if you're going to be doing the work you're going to be doing, Kevin, you have to. It has to become part of the identity you choose to be, you choose to have in the world. And I think that's what the CEO brand is. It's the becoming of the identity that you choose to hold, and how, whether you're doing it in this business capacity or you're doing it in any business capacity, the fact that you've become the identity of that thing that people go, wow, that's the person who we need. That's the guy. That's the girl. They're the ones who we would rely on because of the identity that they've stepped into. And
Yeah.
just the opening statement, it's the public and professional persona of the CEO shaped by their values, leadership style, communication, and visibility. It's encompassing, I think. And that's what's
Absolutely.
beautiful about recognizing it's a full identity that you're moving into. No, Craig, thank you. And from our quote for the day, in the end, vision, so I completely left my mind here. In the end, the vision with the ability to execute is probably sure. In the end, a vision without the ability to execute is, let me do it again. In the end, a vision without the ability to execute it is probably a hallucination. And I was like, yeah, that's important, because it speaks to a whole bunch of these things that we mentioned around style, value, communication.
Yep, correct. And the execution aspect that's the delivery. And, that would, in true brand sense, be about the customer experience proposition.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. Fantastic conversation. And thank you, guys. Please like and share. And please check it out. The Lifestyle Series every week, Wednesday and Thursday. For myself and Craig, have a fantastic week. And I will see you next week.
And look forward to that. Thanks, team. Bye.
Cheers.